Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the show. You're watching Poetry in Motion. I'm your host, Tony Lontis, and in a moment, the gorgeous Sonny Singh will be joining us to chat all things poetry and writing. Now, if you're listening live on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch, or Twitter, please shout out, please comment, and let us know that you're there. If you've missed any of the live shows in this series, and this is the 5th show in a series of 6, please jump on to Tony TV, available on Binge Networks, Hero Go, Paz TV, and Zondra TV Networks USA. And of course, our YouTube channel, where you can catch up and find all the information about all of the shows preceding this one. And a reminder too that if you have a smart TV, you can also download Tony TV and watch from your smart TV anywhere across the world. Now, each week we do a welcome to country, which acknowledges the beautiful work of our Indigenous people in Australia. And so I want to respectfully acknowledge the people of the Yugambeh language region on the Gold Coast, Queensland, Australia, the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and broadcast, and pay my respects to the elders past and present, and all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders listening and watching today. Now, as I said before, this is the 5th in a series of shows called Poetry in Motion with international best-selling author Sonny Singh, who is a cross-cultural seeker of deep knowing. She writes stories about self-discovery to encourage people to accept themselves for who they are and live the life that they want on their own terms. Her tales of her characters' definitive moments on life's journey are both mystical and spiritual and integral to her storytelling, as is her multilingual background. Sonny is of Indian descent, born in Mexico, raised in Colombia, resides in the United States, and is currently visiting Australia. That's a big mouthful. So when she's not traveling, writing, reading, she indulges in meditation, yoga, and aromatherapy. And speaking of aromatherapy, I thought I needed some lavender peace gently billowing into my room today. So that's what's, if you could smell it, it's divine. It's a divine combination of lavender and a few other things, and it makes for a nice, peaceful office space, or broadcast space, as it is today. Now, Sonny's published 3 books in her Soul Seeker collection of poetry, Embody, Embrace, and Embolden, and her first novel, Lonely Dove, which was released at the end of September, is already an international best-selling novel. Lonely Dove hit the top of the charts last week and continues to do well for Sonny, which is incredibly exciting for us. And this week, once again, we get to talk to Sonny about her latest poetry release in paperback of Embrace. Welcome back to the show, Sonny.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be back. And it's
Yay!
so good, international bestseller. That's a new thing.
I know. Congratulations on
Thank you.
international best-selling status. How does it feel, Sonny? Because these things do not happen overnight, but when they do happen, how do you feel?
I felt surreal. I still haven't realized or accepted it in a way. Just because, it was unexpected in my mind. I didn't think that it was possible to have it, but it did, and I'm embracing it.
Yay! Which is just a reminder to the audience that Lonely Dove is still on special on Amazon. Yes. And this week, yay! Look at that.
Yeah. Yes, it's beautiful.
And it's also available on Kindle, because I've bought my Kindle copy as well. So paperback, Kindle. Are you going to do the ebook? Ebook is Kindle. Are you going to do the audiobook, do you think?
I don't know. That's something that I haven't considered yet. I mean, it's sort of been mulling in the back of my head.
It is early.
Yes.
because we've only just released. There's a whole range of processes, audience. When you publish a book, there's a whole range of stuff that goes on before you publish it. Then there's a whole range of stuff that goes on after you publish it. And then somewhere down the track, you go, oh, audiobook version. Okay, that'll be the next thing. And because Sony has so many things currently going on, not only is Lonely Dove catapulted to bestseller status, she's also slowly releasing the paperback versions of her original hard copy poetry series. And this week we actually get to talk about the second in the series, which is, yay, we've got another, yay. This is Embrace. So
Yes.
Embrace is releasing as a paperback today, and the links to purchase the paperback version or the hard copy, because the hard copy version is a beautiful coffee table edition. And so I encourage you, if you want something beautiful to set on your coffee table, Embrace, Embolden, or Embody. Either one or even the three would look beautiful on a coffee table. But today we're going to talk about Embrace because we're releasing it as paperback right now. So Embrace is more about the journey of the cycles of life. So I want you to tell the audience, Sony, about the ebbs and flows and what was happening to you at the time that you were channeling Embrace, because there were some big lifestyle changes for you happening, and I'd love you to walk the audience through what was happening when these poems came to you.
Well, the three poetry books actually do tie in together. And as I shared with Embody, that was very much on a personal level within me what was happening. Not that Embrace was not, it was just Embody was sort of the first step. When I was writing the poetry for Embrace, I was at a stage of flux. I had already decided that I was going to not live alone any longer. So I had packed
Because
up
it was
my life.
COVID, wasn't it? It was like in the middle of
It was the
COVID.
middle of it was the first summer of COVID. So we're talking summer, well, US summer, Australian winter 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And so I had decided that I was going to move in with my parents, and it was a good time for me. It was a good time for them, but there was this sort of, how do I come to terms with all the things that are going on and all the changes? And thus, Embrace was really about understanding that nothing lasts forever, that we're in a cycle, that we're in a cycle in life from our birth to our death, but even in our day-to-day, the night turns day and there's change and there's transition constantly. And so it was more about how do I come to terms with this? How do I accept this? How do I make sense of everything that is happening around me and to me, not just around me, but it was also on a personal level. And so that's most of the poetry in Embrace.
And it's kind of a big decision as an independent adult woman to go back home and live with mum and dad. As much as they love you and as much as you love them, it's still a big decision, isn't it?
It is because, by then you sort of made a life, and I had moved at that time. I was living in Charleston, South Carolina, and I had thought when I had made that original move that was going to be essentially it. Like I was just going to settle there. And so to have to completely reshift and then say, okay, I'm going to move in with my parents. Of course, I also thought, as we all did, that COVID wasn't going to last that long. We didn't have this idea. So I thought it's just going to be a few months, I didn't think it was going to be a couple of years.
Long.
So it just kept on extending and extending and extending. And it was hard on several levels, in the sense of just packing up. All of my things still are packed up in boxes in my parents' house. I knew I was going to be there temporarily. And I still don't have an idea of where I'm going next. It's really interesting.
And yes, that living in a state of flux where things are packed in boxes and you can't quite get into your own groove, so to speak, is challenging in its own right, isn't it?
It is because you feel that you're neither here nor there. So you feel settled, but you don't feel settled. I mean, you have a
Yeah.
place, you have your things, and sometimes it would be little things like, oh, I need such and such thing, but it's packed up in a box. Oh, but
Yeah.
which box?
Which
You start thinking, is it even worth it to go get it? Can I live without it? But then also, in a very odd way, you realize that you don't need as much as you have because you
Yes.
stop remembering all of your possessions, and so you can kind of, it shows you also how adaptable you can be, because you can make your
Yeah.
life in as limited or as expansive as a situation that you have.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, how was it? How was it with mum and dad? I'm sure that because I love my kids being home, and I'm sure they loved you being home.
It was a wonderful thing for all of us,
Yeah.
because especially during COVID,
Mm.
with everybody being so isolated, it was just really good for us to be able to come together. And
Yeah.
during that time, we hardly ever left the house.
Yeah.
You kind of manage your grocery
Yeah.
shopping to extend it as far as you could be. So it's almost like the three of us formed our own little community, and it was beautiful.
Yeah. That's
The perfect
good.
space to be.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so being in that lovely space and being in that like seclusion almost, it was good for your writing, wasn't it, Sony?
It was excellent. It was excellent because I didn't have distractions.
Yeah.
Um, I could just, in a way, allow the poetry to flow. A
Flow.
lot of the poems that are in here came in that time as I
Mm.
was kind of packing up and leaving Charleston, moving to Idaho, because that's where my parents are. And
Mm.
so a lot of that poetry just poured out of me in a way that,
Yes.
um, strangely, and part of the reason that the book is titled this way, but made me embrace myself as a poet, because I'd
Yes.
always considered myself a writer, or at
Mm-hmm.
least since I started writing the novel.
Mm-hmm.
But the poet thing took me a while to, in fact, accept. When I was doing the poetry for Embody, I had no idea what was happening.
Yeah.
And by the time Embrace came along, I thought, oh, wow, I am actually writing
She's
poetry.
doing this.
I can call myself a poet. And it
Yeah.
was part of that also, like, here's something unexpected that I'm coming to terms with.
That's amazing, though. I actually the thought occurred to me after we got off our call the other morning that I wonder if there are poets rather, in your ancient genetic lineage. I wonder.
Not
Do you
that we
know,
know
Sony? Not that you know. Oh,
No, not that we are aware of. I
wow.
mean, I know some of my extended family, not extended, even cousins,
Yes.
write poetry, but I don't know of anybody beyond that. I mean, it's also hard to say because, a lot of things are lost. We
Mm-hmm.
don't have the ability, or we didn't have the ability then that we do now to
Yeah, to
put your
pass
poetry out
down.
there, or to,
Yeah.
yeah, pass down things from one generation to another, but not that we know of.
Wow, that makes it pretty darn special, though.
Yes.
When we talked about Embody, we spoke about some of the impact's not the right word. Some of you felt the poetry in it with bodily symptoms of aches and pains and things as you were channeling it, but it was a little bit different with the poems that sort of have made up Embrace. So what was actually happened? It was kind of a bit more of an emotional journey, wasn't it, Sony?
It was because with Embody, to be honest, I didn't know what was happening.
Yeah.
For Embody, which was the first book, I was just experiencing things, and
Yep.
the words seemed to be coming through me, but I didn't quite either understand. I didn't have
Yeah.
a clear, um, I mean, yes, I knew I was writing poetry, and I had
Mm-hmm.
started to think, should I share some of this poetry? Should I
Yeah.
not? Should I tell people I write poetry? Should I not? With Embrace, it was more of, okay, I
I'm
write
doing
poetry,
this.
and
Mm.
but who am I? What's my voice as a poet,
Mm.
as a writer of poetry? Uh, Strangely, I started sharing some poems on Instagram around that
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
But my thought was, let me just get comfortable with sharing poems, because eventually I'm going to have to get comfortable with sharing my novel. I still didn't think
Yes.
that this was something that would come out in books. I didn't have that concept yet, but I was exploring more of my voice. So,
Mhm.
for instance, I
Mhm.
started understanding that if somebody said to me, write a poem about a strawberry, I
Yeah.
couldn't. But if
Yeah.
I saw a strawberry and I was inspired by the strawberry, I could write a
Yes.
poem about strawberry.
Yes. Which is,
So with
again,
that
it's
understanding of,
really a special gift, isn't it? It's really a special thing to not only acknowledge that that's what's happening, but to accept it and then just to let it flow. Because had you at any time thought, oh no, this is not for me, and stopped it, that would have been the end of it, wouldn't it?
that would have, yes.
It would have just stopped. And I wonder if wondering if there's people listening today that stop themselves from some of those creative pursuits because they think, oh, I'm not a writer or I'm not a poet. I'm sure there's people listening. And from you've been listening to Sonia and I talk each and every week. Again, if at any stage Sonia gone, nah, this is not for me, I'm not a poet, I'm not, then we wouldn't have this outlet. We wouldn't have these three beautiful poetry books um, with us. And we wouldn't possibly have a novel either. So I just want to encourage people listening today that if there's something that you is coming to you naturally, write, speak about it, say, oh, I've got this little story mulling around in my head and it goes something like this. Share it with someone because you never know where it's going to go. And I'm actually curious, I need to know, you were always planning on a novel and you were always going to write and publish a novel. I'm curious to know at what stage, remind the audience when the series of poetry actually started to take on a life and lead to publishment. It was just a conversation, wasn't it?
It was a conversation. So Karen McDermott, who is my publisher for MMH Press, who publishes
Big shout out to Karen and KMD Press and all the publishing houses she manages. She's a phenomenal woman.
she is, and I mean she has three, so it's impressive,
Yes, yes, she does.
with
Yes, she
KMD,
does.
MMH, and Serenity Press.
Serenity.
But I had met Karen at the Serenity Press retreat in Crum Castle in 2019, the one that you and I
Yes.
attended just earlier this year.
Yeah.
So she had the same one 3 years ago, and at that point, I had established a relationship with her and really a friendship. And when COVID hit, she would reach out just to say, "Hey,
Yeah.
how's it going? How are you doing?" And I had told her that I was writing poetry. And at that time, I just said, I've started writing poetry. And in a follow-up conversation, she said, "Are you still writing poetry?" And
Yeah.
I said to her, "Yes, I have." And I showed her the stacks of paper, because my poetry, even to this day, I handwrite.
That's
The
awesome.
novel I can sit down in a keyboard and in my laptop
Yes.
and write it directly, but the poetry, my first draft is always by hand. It's
Yeah.
only when I put it on the computer that I start editing
Yeah.
and whatnot. But so I had a stack of papers that
You
I
even
showed.
wrote on serviettes, didn't you?
Oh
Like
yeah,
there was a
yes,
notes of
wherever I would
scraps of
find it.
paper.
Yeah, post-it notes,
Yes.
notebooks.
Yes.
I mean, I'll show. It's chicken scratch. Like, that's a poem. I don't know if you can see it.
Oh, there we go. There we go. Yes, we can see
It's a
it.
poem called Melbourne. The city
Ah.
has inspired me. And
Yes.
so
Yes.
I showed her, and
I
I at
thought you
that
would like
point,
Melbourne.
I have.
Yes.
And when I showed her the stack, she just said to me, um, no, I actually said to her, "I don't know what to do with all of this." And she said,
Yeah.
"Well, I do know what to do with it. Why don't you put it together?" And she said, "Send me a selection, and we'll take it from there." And so I did. And Embody sort of took shape on our follow-up conversation when, we were talking about the poetry, and, as I was putting it together, realizing that there was a sequence or
Yeah.
a structure in a way to the poetry with the chakras. And so we discussed at that point only book one.
Yeah.
But as I started working on putting Embodied together and
Yes.
really realizing that that stack of poems was quite big,
Mm.
because between the three
Mm.
collection, I mean, the three books in the collection, there's nearly 300 poems, which is a lot.
Wow. Yeah.
It's a lot for, a poetry book usually doesn't have that many. 100 per
No.
book is quite a lot.
Yeah.
So she then, moved forward with Body, and I remember contacting her, very like, I think I have more.
And she's
Than
like,
just one.
yippee!
So then, yeah, we moved from having one to having three.
It's an amazing story, Sony. When we talk about eh, embrace and it being that more emotional journey, it was also, I remember us talking about the fact that it kind of aligned with the zodiac and the Buddhist life stages. So, can you explain how all that interacts in embrace?
Well, so Embodied to me was very straightforward in the sense
Yeah,
that I
the
think I had
chakras.
the chakras, yeah, and I had been working with the chakras in a different
Mm,
form. So prior to, I was doing a lot wellness coaching and aromatherapy, and I used to work on chakras. So it was
yes.
something that was present for
Mm,
me. With
mm.
this one, understanding, as I said, that it was about ebbs and flows,
And
and knowing
life.
things always, in fact, always occur in cycles.
Yeah.
Um, I organized it in such a way that to me felt like, okay, here's me at the beginning of the cycle. And by the
Mm,
end of the book, you sort of get to me at the end of that cycle.
mm.
And then I started curiously, just out of curiosity, looking at different kinds of cycles. And
Yes.
um, I had been reading about Buddhism and about astrology because I was part of the course that I'm currently
Yes.
pursuing Doctor of Divinity for.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
these things started sort of coming together, and me realizing not just that the poems could correspond to a cycle, but also that there was some similarities, despite two completely
Yeah.
different forms of thought between the two, and that they were both divided into 12. There's 12
Ah.
signs in the zodiac, but there's also 12
12.
stages of life in the
Yes.
book wheel of life. And
Yes.
then I started thinking like, oh, let's try to see if we can piece this together. And some of the things did correspond quite
Easily.
well when it came to emotional and maybe more spiritual qualities of what happens,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily in sort of the overt thing. And by this, I mean like in in astrology, the
Yes.
first house, which is the ego, is all about the self.
Yes.
It also is about the self in the Buddhist wheel of life, but it's about the start of life.
Yes.
Uh, so it's sort of you trying to understand who you're trying to be. So the definitions somewhat corresponded, even though they weren't exactly the same.
Yeah, because when I was reading about it, so I could understand that the philosophy, because I've not done a lot of reading around Buddhist philosophy, and I actually loved the explanation of the first stage that energy and it is ignorant and it doesn't know anything and then it takes action that to for it to become consciousness and then so on and so on and so forth. And so I thought that that was a wonderful way of linking your poetry, and then further down it goes on to talk about the five senses, sight, sound, etc., and how that links to the various stages of life, and then goes on and goes right through to the end where obviously old age and death occur, but old age and death symbolically don't have to equate to a physical death, do they? Sometimes that equates to a spiritual death or death of ideas, doesn't it?
It does. And the thing with the Buddhist wheel of life is that it also recognizes that it's not just one life. There's a
Mm,
rebirth process, and that
yeah.
cycle um, puts that together because it says, you're born in this new life having forgotten the old one, uh,
Mm,
and you're trying to make your way in the world, trying to understand who you are,
yeah.
and that's a physical birth, but also on an
Yes.
emotional level.
Yes.
Anytime you start anything new, you're thinking,
Your
what is this?
birth.
Who am I in this? Trying to understand, and then as you grow in that process or in that place or whatever in your life,
Yeah.
you go through different phases of it until you get to the, okay, I'm done with this. Now the cycle is over and I need to move on from here. And so with the wheel of life, when you're talking about your life, you're saying, okay, I'm done with this life.
Yes.
Uh, so your spirit or your soul is preparing for the next one, and your
Mm,
body physically decays, but your
yes.
soul moves on. Your
Yes.
soul is ready to transcend to the next phase. And what's interesting is in astrology, the 12th house is
Yeah.
about that higher consciousness. It's about you connecting with your higher purpose and your higher consciousness. And so it's not necessarily a death, but it
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
about being part of something more expansive, which
Yeah.
ultimately, if you're moving on into your next life, it is about being more expansive.
Yeah. But in your case, it's about discovering the poet within and the growth of that poet and the expansion of your poetry. It all happened in that sort of time. So it aligns quite well in embrace with those stages of life, doesn't it?
It does, and it would in sort of any kind of life cycle. I think for me, we've talked about the fact that a lot of the poems came to me in a channeled form, but
Yeah.
I wasn't even aware. I
Yeah.
I can say that now.
Yeah.
At that point, I really had no idea. I just knew words came to me. I
We're
need to put
coming.
them on
And you wrote
paper
them down.
and I need to write them down. It wasn't that I needed to write them down then and I would forget, because I realized, yes, I was compelled to write it down, but even if I had a thought process, like for instance, we've talked about this too, a lot of ideas
Yes.
came in the shower. Well, I couldn't, get out of the shower and write it down. I had to wait until
Exactly.
the shower was over.
Yeah.
But I would
Yeah.
remember. I would remember.
Yes.
Like the ideas stayed in my head enough to be able to put them on paper. And I think with Embrace was me understanding that, and me understanding that
Mm.
there was a difference in how the poetry came to me versus how I wrote the novels or the short stories
Yeah.
that I was working on. Because the novel
Yeah.
and the short story,
You
I
had to
can sit down
think.
at any point and say, okay, this is where I'm going to work.
Mm.
And I'm going to dedicate this time. And as you say, yes, I had to think and I had to say, okay,
Yeah.
well, I'm going to now work on chapter 1, or I'm going to work on editing or whatever it is. Whereas the
Mm.
poems, I couldn't dictate it. I couldn't say, okay, poem,
Yeah.
come to me now. It was more about just staying open.
Yeah.
Um, and that state of openness is your connection to understanding that the creativity and the source of
Mm.
creativity, yes, is within, but it's also without. It's also part of the what we call the
Yeah.
universal
Yeah.
consciousness.
Yeah.
So yes, that 12 stage for me was recognizing, oh, I think there's something bigger happening than me
Yeah.
with my poetry. And a lot of that is expressed in Embrace at the end.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Sony, poems are still coming to you. It hasn't stopped,
Yeah.
has it? As evidenced by the latest poem that Sony's just started working on, Melbourne. Before before I go on though, can you share with us a bit about writing Melbourne? Not the words, but what you've experienced that sort of kick started that creative process again.
um, I get a lot of poetry written, and this is the other thing that, since the world's opened up and I started traveling
Yeah.
again, I get a lot of my poetry when I'm in airplanes, when
Oh.
I'm in trains. Something about the motion I don't know if it's
Mm.
the actual motion or
Uh-huh.
the act of physically moving from one place to another, or simply the fact that you have no dis like there's nothing to
No
take your attention off.
distractions.
Like you're
Mm.
there.
Mm. Yeah. No, I
And
agree with you. It's a
so
great time to be distraction free in a plane.
and when the plane started descending into Melbourne, there was this like carpet of clouds, and I just kept on
Yes.
staring out the window, and somehow, the words started coming to me then. But it wasn't until I got down off the plane, got in a taxi, and came to the hotel where I'm staying. Uh, Went for a walk by the river, the Yarra River that's right
Yes,
here.
yes.
The poem just came. So when I came back into my hotel
Oh,
room, I just started writing it out.
start writing.
Yeah.
Oh.
It was impactful. I mean, the city's beautiful. The journey into it is beautiful. It's
Mm.
great because you can see the ocean. There's the
Yeah.
river. I mean, there's
Yes.
just so much going on in the city and it's
I was
so
just going to
vibrant.
say, so good food and good places. What have you done into, so there's shopping and there's food and there's lots of places to visit within Melbourne, and then when you start to go outside of Melbourne, there's some amazing mountain ranges and little towns and all sorts of wonderful stuff outside of Melbourne. What is it you think that you align with most? Is it the people and the food, or for me, there's just an energy about Melbourne that is quite different from any of the other capital cities, and it's a little bit unique, and I just love it. And lots of people will say the same thing about Melbourne. I don't know. There's just an energy. It's just like, oh, Melbourne. It's good. It's good to be here.
It is. It feels very homey, even though it's a city.
Mhm.
Like you just really
Mhm.
feel that
Yes.
you fit
Yes.
and sort of in the sync of the city. Like it was.
Yes.
I've walked around a lot without a map just to see where kind of my
Oh, yeah, yeah.
feet take me, so to
Yeah.
speak. And so, for instance, yesterday I ended up in Chinatown without even knowing that there was a Chinatown because I had
Oh.
wanted to go to the Queen Victoria markets.
Oh, yes.
And
Yes.
I walked all the way over there. And
Yeah.
then I thought, oh, well, now I don't want to go back in the same way I came. So let me
On
just
to
see if
somewhere
I can
different.
find
Yeah.
a different road. And I loved it. I lived in Hong Kong for
Yes.
4 years, and this in a way reminded me, like I felt like, oh my God, I'm in
Oh.
Australia, but I feel like I'm right back in Hong Kong, but in
Oh.
a different way.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah,
That's
so it felt very homey
that's
to
good to hear because I'm a very big fan of Melbourne. It's a great place to visit, and I don't know, it's just there's a vibe, and it really is good fun. And yes, the markets are amazing. You've now just, I'm like, oh gosh, it's been so long since I've been to the markets. I have to go again. And yes, Chinatown's great, and there's lots of good food and lots of things to
delicious.
do. So it's, I know there's really good food in Melbourne. So, which is why I don't understand why so many Melburnians then decide to come to Queensland, because I'm like, you've got a great space in Melbourne, but then they say, so the other thing about Melbourne is that the weather can be quite changeable. So it can go from sunny to rainy to snowy and back again all in one day, which I think is kind of fun and interesting. But other people don't like it at all.
I was stuck in the rain yesterday. So
Oh,
today it's
yes.
dry and beautiful.
Yeah,
The sun's come out a little like cloud, sun, but at least it hasn't
yeah,
rained.
yeah.
But yes, I've experienced some of the Melbourne
All the
rain.
fantastic. Now, the other thing that I wanted to talk about and ask, because I know we talked about beta readers for Lonely Dove. What about for the poetry? I don't think I've asked you if you had beta readers for the poetry.
Well, I informally did in that I
Yeah,
shared a lot of my poems on
on
Instagram,
socials.
on social media.
Mm,
I started mostly
mm,
only on Instagram, and then eventually I created a Facebook page and
yeah.
started uploading the poems on there. There's a whole collection of them also on my website. I also post a lot of my blogs and my writing on
Yeah.
medium.com.
Yes.
And Medium is a good source because you get exposure to fellow authors.
Yeah.
And so I started getting a lot of um,
Mm.
claps as you do on
Yeah, yeah.
Medium. Somebody reads
Yeah.
your post, and they like it, they clap.
Yeah.
And I started getting followers. Like I just started picking up followers on Medium
Yeah. Yeah.
with my poetry, and in a way that was my beta readers. When I started posting them on Instagram, I had either friends or people I didn't know private message me
Yeah.
or even comment saying that one poem or another touched them.
Touch them. Yeah.
They resonated with it. One person even printed it and put it on their mirror and said they were reading it
Oh,
every day,
Sony, that's
things like that.
lovely.
So I didn't have beta readers per se for
No,
each,
but that's
but for the
pretty
poems,
good
yes,
though.
I got a lot of feedback, and I can say that that's a lot of what encouraged me to continue
Yeah.
writing,
Yeah.
because
Yeah. Yeah.
when you hear that somebody's resonating, you know, for
Yeah.
one, I write the poem for myself, whatever I'm
Yes.
experiencing in that moment, or whatever my is happening with me in that
Mm.
moment, not thinking about the
That,
other person. So when you share it and somebody else says, "Oh wow, I've
oh,
connected,"
that's great.
you think like, "Oh, you know,
Yeah.
here you go. We actually are all on this universal experience. Like I
Yeah.
think this is just happening to me,
Yeah.
but other people are going through the same thing." And so
Yeah.
it's good. It's encouraging.
Fantastic. Um, Now I want you again this week to read us some of the poetry from Embrace, and I want you to then tell us what that particular poem specifically means to you. And if you can remember where you were when it came to you, that'd be really fascinating as well.
So the poem that I'm going to read is called Radical Turnaround. Oh, I don't think you
Yeah.
can see that. It's on page 148 in case anybody wants to read
Cool.
along. So I'll read it first and then I'll talk about
Yes,
it.
please.
So I am in the midst of a 180, except I didn't go anywhere. I may have gone backwards a bit, needed the leverage in my step before I took a chance to turn a U. The, the days had grown bleak, boring. I had to face my reality, broken. I had reached a wall, stalled, nowhere else to go, I felt. Hired a construction team, repaired, rebuild, putting back the pieces. Within, time is in my hands. I am letting go of so much, feels absolute. Outsiders no longer come before me. All they had to do was be. All I had to do was please. I needed that, and they needed me. I tipped it over. I come first. It's the only way to move forward, not to slog away at life. Not what the tough, not not what the thought distracts me. Where do I go with this new orientation? Which oyster do I take, world? Eating would be more fun, satisfying. For that, I need strength, direction, and a narrowing of dreams or an expansion. With this radical turnaround, new chances, a newfound resolve, intentions, I can finally get back to living. This existence has more possibility on my own terms, empowered.
Yay! Thank you. So tell us about that poem, Sony.
So that poem is a lot about, interestingly, what we have been talking about,
Yeah.
me realizing that I had reached a stage of no return in terms
Yeah.
of leaving Charleston and having to move to my parents' house. And it was me coming to turn, like, okay, well, I've
Mm,
been here. My life is turning in a different direction. I don't quite know where I'm going. I don't quite know what
mm,
is happening.
mm.
Uh, I can feel that this is good for me, but I also recognize that it's my choice to make something good for me, that I have
Yes.
to take that ownership of saying, you know, and I played on the your world is your oyster type of scenario and saying, well,
Mm,
yes, I know my world is my oyster, but at the same time, it's up to me to take that chance. It's up to me to
mm.
take that step to turn this around. So it was a thought process of I'm in this place that I'm not really sure I feel comfortable in, but I'm going to make
Yeah.
the most of it.
Yeah. So, Sony, there's something in that space of feeling uncomfortable. And for a lot of people, sitting in that uncomfortable space and just seeing what happens often leads to life changing circumstances or life pivots. And it feels like that happened to you. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely. Because when I wrote this poem, I still had not published poetry. Meaning, I had
Yeah,
started putting things out onto social media, but Embody hadn't come to it into existence.
yeah,
And so it was this whole, okay, I see that there is something that is coming, but now I'm going to actually dedicate my focus to it, or my intention to it, maybe not
yeah,
necessarily focus, but to make something of this. And if it hadn't been for the conversations, not just the conversations with Karen, but just me being open to saying,
yeah,
yeah, I'm going to do this, I am going to write poetry, things wouldn't have come together.
yeah. And in those moments of discomfort, it takes courage to take the next step, doesn't it? So for you, it was a courageous step to commit to writing the poetry and then commit to actually publishing the poetry, because that had never been in your life sphere of where your life could go, was it?
No,
Until you
not at all.
started channeling.
And the funny thing is, I in fact was having a conversation with somebody this morning who said to me, how is it that you write a book? And I just said, you do. And she's like, but it's so scary. I can't do it because I
Yeah,
feel the fear. And I said to her, I also felt a lot of fear. I
fear.
felt extremely vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and especially with the poetry, because the poems are really personal.
They are
The novel is still a
beautifully.
fictional story that
Yeah,
I've concocted, but the poem is different. The poem is really me, what I'm
really.
going through, what I am
Mm,
feeling, how I see the world. And so to put that
mm.
out there, I mean,
Scary.
super scary, because people will judge you, people will
They
criticize
do.
you. Not
They
everybody will
do.
like the poem. Not everybody will like the poems.
Mm.
I remember one of the worst reviews I've gotten was somebody who said to me, it just looks like words that you put together. And I'm thinking, well, isn't that all
The
poetry?
poetry.
It's just words that you put together.
And that's the thing though, Sony. If you put yourself out there, you open yourself up to criticism and hurtful comments. But the thing is, they can only hurt you, and they can only if you allow it to. So
Mhm.
you actually have to go, well, that's their opinion and they're entitled to that opinion, but I'm actually not going to allow that to stop me, because overridingly there's such support for what I do. There's such positive comments, there's such great reviews, so I'm going to keep going anyway. And that's where greatness comes from, isn't it? Where you feel uncomfortable, you put it out there, you get some great reviews, you get some bad reviews, but you keep going.
Mhm.
That's the important thing, isn't it? Is to keep on going and not
Well, and the
stop.
thing also, what I was telling the woman this morning is, I
Mm.
absolutely felt the fear. It was
Oh yeah.
just, I did it anyway. So it wasn't easy. It was still a hard thing to go through on an emotional level. But,
Mm.
if you're living in your purpose, if you're
Yes.
doing the things that bring you joy, then
Yes.
I said to her, no one was going to stop me. I mean,
No.
you don't have to like what I do or the things that I share or the
That's
way that I
right.
share things, but I stand in it with my sense of passion, my sense of
Yeah.
identity, and my
Yeah.
sense of integrity. And so,
Yeah.
I will move forward with it. And yes, it would be delightful if everybody loved the poetry
But they're
or
not going
everybody
to.
loved it, but it's not
Realistically,
realistic.
it's not realistic. I
Mhm.
actually remember an author friend of mine, and he has written, like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books. And I actually remember him saying to me, I think just before I hit like the publish button, the go button, which is not actually a button, it's just yeah, it's okay to publish, with
Yes,
your head,
it's a mental button.
with your head going, what am I doing? What am I doing? What am I doing? He actually said to me, he said, you'll have lots of comments from different people and you will have bad reviews. And my heart sort of skipped a beat. And he said, actually think about a bad review as having made it as an author. And so that actually stuck in my brain. And when I did eventually get, I actually only got one bad review, but it was a pretty doozy, it was a doozy of a bad review. But his words stuck in my head. And I remember thinking, okay, I've made it now. I've got my first bad review. Because at the end of the day, whatever gets you past that moment of crazy fear, crazy, oh my God, who do I think I am? What do I think I'm doing? Why the heck did I decide to publish anything? You have to get over that moment because we all have them, don't we, Sony? I'm sure that you still have them and will continue to have those moments where you go, what the hell am I doing? But greater than that is the beauty of your words, the creativity of your poems, and the help that they give to other people across the planet. And that's what keeps you going, isn't it?
It is. And, what is fascinating with that is it is scary. Even getting on stage and reading a poem.
Yes.
I had to do that 2 weeks ago and my voice was shaking and I couldn't wait to get off the stage.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things
Yeah.
that, they said to me, you have 5 minutes. I think I took barely 3 minutes because I couldn't wait to get off the stage. It
Yeah.
does still to this day make me really nervous.
Yes.
And it's because you're putting yourself out there, you're exposing
Yeah.
yourself, but there's still a higher calling. There's still a higher
Yes.
a bigger sort of
Yes.
drive that is pulling you forward
Yes.
to say, yes, that is scary. And I don't know if I will ever learn to live with that. But I'm going to just
Keep
continue
doing it.
moving forward. In a way, it's almost because you don't know what else to do.
That is a really great thing to say because sometimes you're really not sure where the journey's taking you. You just know it's taking you somewhere and you've just got to stick on that track. And again, it is scary. Like, I don't want the audience to think that authors aren't fearful that their
We're extremely
work's not
fearful.
going to be accepted because every single one of them would be lying if they said there weren't elements of fear in putting their work out there.
I
And
don't think I've met anyone who's not fearful. I mean,
agreed.
even from people who are
Prolific
best-selling,
writers.
prolific, everybody's fearful of putting their words out there.
Absolutely. So, if you're listening today and think that you've got poetry that you want to write or you've got a book that you want to write, then just start. You don't have to have it all organized. You don't have, so Sony didn't have any of the poetry organized. She just wrote when she was prompted and had the words, she wrote them down. And it was a step-by-step process to get them to publication. But the first step in that process is always the hardest. And from our conversations with Sony audience, you would understand that that was just accepting these words are coming to me, I need to write them down, and she did it without thought or without planning. And
Yeah.
that's a beautiful thing though, Sony. It's a really
But
beautiful thing.
we're often our own worst enemies. We
Oh
come
God,
up with
yes.
all sorts of reasons of why not to do something.
Hmm.
We're afraid of what people will say, or maybe we're
Yeah,
not good enough, or
yeah.
maybe, this,
What if
that,
it
or the other.
fails? What if I fail?
Yeah, there's all of these what ifs, what ifs, what ifs.
Yeah,
But the truth is, every day is a what if, right? We don't know what's
yeah,
going to happen in a given
yeah,
day. So
yeah.
if you don't give yourself the chance, then who else will? And that's the thing that I remind myself all the time. It has to start with me, because
It
if
does.
I don't put myself out there, how am I going to
Mm,
reach other people, or how are
mm.
people even going to have the opportunity to say yes or no to my poetry? But
That's right.
I have to give myself that chance, and everybody should give themselves their chance. It's just we,
Yeah.
yeah, we
We're
stand in
so
our own
hard
way.
on ourselves. Yeah, yeah. But the other thing is too, if you're courageous enough to put yourself out there, you actually give loads of other people permission to do the same thing. And that means more and more people are living with passion, doing things that they love, and creating a better world for us all to live in, because poetry and words are important for humans. That's how we connect. That's how we tell stories. It's an important thing to do. And you don't actually have to get to the point of publication. You may decide that you just want to write for magazines. You might just want to write for your family. You might just want to write for your kids. Whatever it is, just start, because you never know where that journey's going to take you. And for Soni, it actually started with a novel, but the poetry came and it went out to the world, and now she's going back to the novel writing, and then there's more poetry to come. So it hasn't stopped anything. It's just increased the creativity for you, Soni, I would think.
It has. And that's the thing, that it's about allowing ourselves to the space to actually do. Another conversation I was having, somebody was talking about not having time, or not having, the space or the ideal environment. And I said, the moment this becomes your priority, all of those excuses fall to the wayside, because when it becomes important to you, you will find the time and the space. Yeah. And it actually doesn't have to be a long time. Sometimes you think like, I have to dedicate days or have to dedicate hours. Sometimes it's 10 minutes, 20 minutes,
absolutely,
30 minutes, whatever it is that you can spare. Just even starting to write, getting a few words down is all that you need to do. And then if you do it every day, it'll accumulate.
It becomes habit, and it accumulates and becomes thing. But you got to start. Like you got to get out of your own way, give yourself that permission to just see what happens and just start.
And there's no one else who's going to give you permission other than yourself.
No one's going to give you permission. No, not in this world. Not in this world. And I'm so glad that you were courageous enough to take that step and write those words that were coming to you down and form the poetry, because knowing you and seeing that more poems and more writings are still coming is just a wonderful thing to observe, and it's a beautiful thing to be part of an author's journey. It's actually a real privilege to see how people grow and develop, and I've known Soni long enough to know that some of those, and observe some of those fears and those fears about public speaking, etc., and know that there is growth, and I've seen the growth in Soni over that period of time, and that will happen to you too. So you'll start out as someone and you'll head towards someone else, and it's all about following your, as you like to say, Soni, trust your soul's destination.
And we don't have to know where we're going.
No.
And that's part of the beauty, that we don't always have to know the outcome. It's about embracing the moment,
and the journey. The journey's
and the journey, because sometimes it's just about being open. And when you release the expectation of how things should be, that's when all of the world opens up, and there's possibility in your life, and you never know just where it will take you. Like I would never have been able to tell you that I would have 3 books of poetry.
Absolutely.
And much less that, I would do that all within a span of a year. I mean, that to me was
very quick.
Unexpected and crazy.
Soni,
how it's going to turn out.
Absolutely. So we're quickly running out of time again. We have so much fun chatting on this show. I want to remind people that you can buy the bestseller Lonely Dove right now, and the links are attached to this interview. You can reach out and jump on Soni's website, sonisingh.com. You can connect to Soni on socials, and I really encourage you to do that. Connect and chat with Soni and ask her questions about that fear. Ask her questions about channeling poetry. Ask her questions. She loves to connect with people and hear their thoughts. It's been a key part of her experience as a writer. And just a reminder too that each of the poetry books has been released. The first two are now in paperback, so in Body and Embrace today, and next week in our final show we're going to talk about Embolden. Now you might remember a couple of shows back we talked about flute playing. Now Embolden has a wonderful poem about flutes, and we're going to share that with you next week and tell you the flute story as well. So Soni, I want to thank you once again for jumping on the show and being so open and sharing with us about your journey. Congratulations yet again on bestseller status for Lonely Dove. Please go out and buy the book. It's a great read. I haven't finished it yet, but I'm getting there. And we will be back next week with Soni to talk about the final in the series of her poetry books and to round out all the things we've spoken about for the last 6 shows. Soni, keep enjoying Melbourne. I can't wait to chat to you next week.
Yes.
We will be back with Poetry in Motion, same time next week. Thank you, Soni.
Thank you for having me.
Bye for now, everyone.